I would say that, thank you. I would say that if you can keep your video turned off and you're unmuted during the talk, that will greatly help with the recording. Following the talk, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions. Please put any questions you have into the chat function, and then I will help Mayoma with those at the end and curate them at the end of the talk. Now, I'm delighted to introduce you to our speakers, two of whom, not all of whom, as it says here, are Lucy alumni. So chairing the panel is Mayoma, who studied engineering here and is a Lucy alumnus. She is joined alongside Mira, who did veterinary medicine with us, and in fact with me. And then Sanchita Paul, who was at at Pembroke College. Sorry, it's been a long day. Anyway, I'm very much looking forward to this talk. So it's over to you, Mayoma.
Thank you, Jane, and I'm really delighted to be here. And really, what I would like us to get out of this is for everyone to feel comfortable, and we want to share our experiences around nation and race, and just to talk about it openly. What I really feel is that we need to come at it from a positive angle and get everyone on board. And it's not about laying blame against any particular group of people in society, but it's, I feel at the end of this talk, we'd like everyone to feel comfortable to talk a little bit more about people's experiences of race in different places, either through their work or school, whatever experience they have. And I really like to go deep and dive in straight away. So I'd like to ask, first of all, I don't know, Sanchita, have you ever experienced or witnessed any situation where someone's not been treated and probably didn't act? And if you can just talk about anything around that.
Yeah, and I'm going to pop a forward focus on this one, because I think earlier in my career, so I'm now a consultant paediatrician, and I work at the clinical school as well as I've just been appointed as the communication skills lead. So I think I may have built a bit the expectations up a bit high about my my talking abilities, but the challenge is that earlier in my career I saw lots of things happening in hospitals, lots of things happening around me that I didn't feel able to speak up about, and that's kind of motivated me towards a lot of the work that I'm doing at the moment, which is a CCS lead. We're really taking on kind of racism and discrimination and trying to empower our students to start speaking up. And so with that background, I'm now feeling more able to speak up in meetings if I see people being misrepresented. And I think that's really the message I want to put across, that actually it was the students who wrote the letter which changed our department, which has developed this session, which has now empowered me to be speaking up on their behalf, and probably for myself a bit more as well. Has that answered your question okay?
Oh, no, that's, I don't know if Mira, you have any experience you'd like to share with us?
I think most of my experience has been from a personal point of view, or the experiences that I can remember. I think they're the ones that actually stick in my memory most clearly. I have been party to witnessing actual sort of discrimination and not saying anything about it. I think when you're the sole person of colour in a room, it can feel very difficult. You've got the burden of representation on your shoulders. You can feel very sort of alienated and alone at saying something. So I think there's probably been more times I've not said something rather than actually spoken up and said something. And that's been actions of both overt and covert racism. So people have used offensive words and I've not said a word. People have sort of used microaggressions and I've kept quiet on those sides too. I think it's very difficult to speak up. I think that goes for everybody in any situation. It takes a very, I think, confident and brave person to actually stand up and say, I don't agree with what's been said by a group.
That's really interesting when you talk about it takes a confident person. But I'd just like to pick on what you said, you know, the overt and covert racism. Sometimes people don't get it. How would you describe it to someone? Like, how would you differentiate the two of them? Sanchita?
I think I saw Mira open her mouth. I might let Amira speak first. Is that okay?
I'm sorry.
I would probably say what you are about to say, in that overt racism to me is where somebody comes out with a blatant derogatory remark. So it's name calling. It's fairly obvious, unless you're very, very blind to it, that it is a racist remark. But covert racisms are a little bit harder to spot. They might be something simple, like a lot of people will spot a microaggression, you know, so where are you from? No, where are you really from? No, I meant before that. Before that, where are you from? And what they're wanting to get is, where is your brownness from? But that can feel like you know, people do excuse that kind of behaviour, but when somebody won't take your first answer of Rotherham as where you're from, and yet you would take that for a white person that they're from Rotherham, then it is actually a microaggression, a sort of covert example of racism.
Sanchita?
Yeah, I think I'd echo that. And I think it's always that real challenge of, what was the intention of the person sitting opposite me? Because it's really hard, because I know how it feels, but it's really hard. And that's kind of a lot of the work that we're doing, is to think about how can we work out what's going on in the person's mind opposite us. Because that was a real struggle, particularly if you're asked the same question over and over again. And they call it death by 1,000 cuts, is the classical term for kind of the impact of microaggressions and these micro insults, invalidations, or assaults as they call them. And so you're left thinking, golly, what's going on? And then you've got this continuum between conscious and unconscious. Is it really just unconscious bias leaking out, which is what a lot of what we're trained in is, or is it somebody really saying that? And then it's sometimes really subtle things like, I worked with a colleague who they would just turn their back to them, which is a really simple thing to do, but actually the impact of an entire kind of group of people turning their back to you and rubbing past you as you're like making sure that you didn't have enough space to walk. It's really hard to write anything about that, because they just moved. But it's how you felt in that moment as well. So it's a really tricky concept, Myome, because it's not always just about the person who's delivering it. It's about how we're receiving it and feeling it. What else was going on? Did anybody else really see what happened? Is it just me? Can I speak up? Am I the voice of the coloured person in this moment? I don't know.
That's really interesting. And I think even all of what we described now are sort of things you can still see in a way, because you can see someone turning their back. What about when you just see the outcome? For instance, we've said quite a few times here, you're the only person in the room. So you can't tell what's happened, but you know that maybe at the early stage of your career or your project, there were more of you, and then, but you're the only one left standing, or you're the one. What do you have to say about something like that?
That it's an odd, so racism and all of these challenging concepts are, because of the complexity of emotions and challenge involved, we almost overinflate our impact in that situation. So I remember having a really powerful conversation with a white male facilitator who was finding it difficult to deliver some of the stuff that we'd written. And he actually said to me, you know, Sanchita, do I represent everything that's wrong? And then I just reflected it back, because that was his own anxiety coming through, which is, you know, valid. And my own anxiety coming through was, well, am I the solution? Or is it just that this is a tricky situation that, you know, history has left us with, and it's how we perceive that history. How do we frame it? How do we make peace with it? And how do we move forwards effectively? So I don't know if that's answered your question, Myoma.
No, it does. It does. I think it draws out the fact complex, Mira, I know you have, I don't know if you have any experiences of this from either your work life or your hobbies, anything where you've had to call things out?
As I said, I'm quite non-confrontational, and I tend to sort of carry the burden internally rather than actually voice it. My reasoning is that if I carry it internally, I'm the only one that hurts from it. If I actually voice it, somebody else is hurt from it as well as me, and I'm already carrying that hurt. So is it better to just keep it quiet and keep it to me and keep the peace? Or is it better to say something? Because you never know how, despite I think we get very good at reading body language, I think you never really know how it's going to be taken and whether you're going to, in that heat of the moment, deliver it in a way that will be most acceptable to the other party. And so no, I don't speak very much, I'm afraid, and I'm guilty as everybody else for not speaking out.
And that's the sad thing. So I'm just going to add something to that, Mira, that I remember telling my mum about some of the stuff that happened to me, and I don't find it easy to talk about this stuff, probably for the same reason that you don't. And I remember telling my mum about one of these events, and she got really annoyed on my behalf. She goes, "But you were born here. You're a graduate from here." And I go, "I know, Mum, but what can I do?" And then because she was so upset, actually, I then realized that it hurts the people around you to see that you can't do anything about this behavior. So I don't know. Sorry, it's got quite dark now, hasn't it?
It's
got real.
Interesting, but I think it's real. It's got real because these are people's real experiences. Because sometimes when people talk about racism and the fact that it doesn't exist, it's because they don't hear about it. And so it's good for people to understand that it's really uncomfortable for people to even admit it's happening, because you want to believe the best in everyone. So sometimes if am I judging the other person wrong? Am I being too sensitive about this? And it's just really a difficult thing to experience, and then follows on that it's a difficult thing to speak about. But in terms of when people speak about it, because I'm really of the opinion that the more we speak about it, no matter how difficult it is, and it doesn't have to be long conversations, just open and honest conversations, the more we'll understand it from every side, that slowly it gets better. And that when we're gray, very gray and old, these discussions don't happen in this same kind of way. So I just want to start touching on because there's been quite a lot of discussion, especially since George Floyd, about racism. What thing do you find least helpful when people talk about racism? What do you think is a common mistake that people fall into that sort of derails the conversation?
When people, I find it difficult when people try to justify, when they change the topic, when they compare. Comparison is a very difficult thing, I think, and whilst some things are comparable, like the price of cheddar cheese in Asda and the price of cheddar cheese in Tesco, lived racism, I don't think, has a direct comparison. So I think I find those kind of aspects quite difficult and challenging to work with and to try and sort of, I don't know, negotiate with the other person. And there's some conversations that I just think are pointless having, because I already know that it's a no-go area. So I don't have those conversations then.
No, I think I'll echo what Mira said, that yeah, it's that response. And I learned this from one of my students. I won't name check him, but he taught me the concept of gaslighting. which I genuinely didn't know existed until my student told me this is what's been going on. And I had this aha moment when I thought, golly, this actually reinforces and underpins why so many people are being silenced. And it's this idea that, you know, it's kind of what Mira was saying about it's not really happening. Maybe it's you, maybe it's something else, give them a chance, and all of these other things which detract from the fact that something significant to you has just happened, and that you can't talk about it and explore it because it makes everybody uncomfortable, what we've already kind of said. And I think particularly in, you know, for us going up the career ladders, there's that fear of repercussions as well, because you don't want to be that, and I'm going to, you know, I don't want to use adjectives here, but that insert adjective girl, or insert adjective, you know, because we get labeled or stigmatized, or even the emotion, when actually what happened was I said something, whereas it becomes emotionally tailored and then labeled and then judged in a way that I think if I was a male, I wouldn't get, and maybe if I wasn't of colour, I wouldn't have that attached to me as well, for simply raising a concern.
Yes, and I know Mira talked about not comparing, and I know you're quite keen on getting the message out there that even among ethnic minorities, everyone experiences it differently. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, about the individual experience and people acknowledging that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I can, my sort of perceived experience of racism is very different to my mother's, for example. My mum was born and brought up in India, spent her A-level period in Britain because my grandfather was stationed here, but essentially didn't really have very much to do with British life until she married my father and they moved over in the early 70s to Britain. Now, my mother treats racism like water off a duck's back. She was a doctor. She used to go into schools and vaccinate children. The children used to call the P word across the playground to her, and she would just blink it off and carry on walking. And, you know, we've had people in the supermarket that have called us really awful names, and nobody has kind of come to our defense. And that is something that I remember from being 11 years old, and it's something that my mother has completely forgotten about. But my mum is oblivious as well to people's body language and sort of and facial expressions, and I can tell when somebody who has got, you know, they've got a little bit of prejudice, because it becomes quite obvious when you get used to seeing it on a regular basis. People who are a little bit prejudiced. My mother is completely oblivious to that, and I'm not. And I wonder whether that's because of our upbringing. I was born and brought up in the northeast of England, which was quite an experience from a racism point of view. And my mother didn't have to shoulder that burden as a child. So I think racism, if you get it as a child, I think it impacts on you differently than if you receive it as an adult, when you're sort of mature enough to just deal with it.
Sanchita, do you have anything to add?
I'm not sure. I thought Mira answered that really effectively. I think it does stick with people in different ways, and actually the stories that I hear from my students nowadays are kind of really quite different, but I see hope in their eyes, and that's something that's very interesting, because as much as I may have been pessimistic about being spat at and had stones thrown at me when I was little, you then kind of move past all of that, and you're seeing actually there is a potential for change now. Our students are coming to me with stories like, yeah, but what can we do, Sanchita? And that's really powerful, because they've actually led the movement for what we're doing at the clinical school. And you're welcome to read their open letter and things, because I think that's freely available. So as much, I think actually it's both different lived experience, different perspectives, I guess, how you understand and perceive things, but also I guess that idea of hope, and the fact that people are starting to listen and have those conversations, which I don't think was happening 20-30 years ago.
Yes, I think there's something in, you get more confidence when you hear someone relate a similar experience to you. It just sort of makes you think this is real, and someone else who understands it has acknowledged me, and you kind of like feel you can deal with it better when you encounter it again. I just want to touch on like what, because we sort of say racism, especially to the, in quotes, guilty party, it's sometimes invisible, or it's unconscious, and they don't. What can we do to make people more aware? How can we increase people's alertness so that we're not talking about it after it's happened? We can almost sort of preempt it before it happens. Sanjita, you can go, or Mira, anyone will.
So this is a tricky one, because if I give you the example of the session that we designed and then talk from there. So the session we've designed in communication skills is literally that we started off, let's call it how to professionally address microaggressions, which I then, the first thing I did as the lead was to change it to practical approaches towards EDI, because I don't want my students or the future doctors to just be addressing or removing things. It's about promoting and changing the society and people's minds, because we've got Cambridge students with us, you know, they can make real change. And that's what's kind of optimistic about kind of having this conversation with you today about working with the students and actually hopefully being a role model to them that actually empowers me to think, golly, I didn't have the best experience at times, but these young people can actually do something. They're listening, their eyes are wide open, they know what's going on. And they can do something. I'm not sure if I've answered your question, Mayom. I've just realised I've gone off on a tangent.
No, that's okay. But if you can share a bit more about how you...
Oh, how to raise awareness, absolutely. So we developed a framework. Sorry, let me get back to this. So we actually, I remember reading all the literature. So I've done a full literature search on how to address microaggressions and racism and all isms. And what we found in Cambridge was that none of those frameworks adequately represent all the ways to address it. So we've pulled it together to develop what we call a collated combined Cambridge framework. We have to put Cambridge in there somewhere. And the two strategies are to raise awareness and to educate the person opposite you. So the first three tools are simple communication skill strategies, non-verbal communication, that you're not in agreement with what's been going on, and then you move towards educate and awareness. So the educate could be to directly challenge that assumption. So you mentioned this about this group of people, but actually in my experience, I've noticed this. That sounds like a stereotype, that sounds like a judgment to me, so open labeling it. And there are various other strategies, and we've listed them all out that you're welcome to, I should be able to share that with you and use. And the idea of raising awareness about how their comments might be perceived. You might have meant that by your comment, but what I understood and felt was this. And actually this is really effective way of gently approaching somebody who, if it is unconscious bias leaking, because we all have unconscious biases, which, if I'm being really honest, are more related to where I grew up in England than they are related to my skin colour, because it's culturally developed, then I'm more likely to have the unconscious biases of people brought up here. So I'm going to have to put my hand up and say I have a few myself. And I guess that's where it starts, right?
Yes. I mean, it's not always one-sided. So sometimes there are things we can also misjudge others as well. Mira, how do you approach this with your friends? I know you have quite a mix of friends. How do you just talk about the topic, and how do you find a way to introduce it?
I use social media these days. I've got braver since the death of George Floyd at actually raising topics on social media. The reason I like to have them on social media is that it gives people time to read and reflect rather than jumping in with an answer or a response. I have the same handful of about 20 friends who repeatedly discuss these topics, and the remainder of my 510 friends who choose to ignore those topics because they are obviously difficult topics. But I bring them up and put them on my page, so in the hope that those people that aren't brave enough to discuss them yet will actually read them. Or take a bit of notice of some of them, or maybe it'll make somebody kind of think about how they deal with certain aspects or how they behave in certain ways. So I don't know. I've had some, I mean, I've really sort of found some very close friends that I didn't know were so close and so supportive since last year, really, which is it's a very positive thing.
Yes, I think the discussions are definitely getting more frequent and more positive. I guess it's just finding a way to get it into more structures. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about career experience and any particular issues with racism.
Not sure what to say, because have you got anything to add there, Mira? Because I'm not sure I've got.
I'm not really sure that I've got anything further to add on to that.
A little bit.
I suppose it sometimes makes a difference that when you, I think I can actually label these reports. So we know within the NHS that there is a differential attainment. We know that it's predictable from medical school based on the colour of your skin and whether or not you're born and brought up in the UK. So we know that that pattern exists, and there's a predictability to that. We know that in positions of power, people of minority backgrounds are significantly underrepresented. So it's really challenging. If I talk from a work perspective, that I see it in practice. So when I was in my training as to become a paediatrician, you would see different people getting allocated in different ways. So if you are perhaps not trained in this country, you're less likely to have research and publications or everything else that you kind of need. So you're less likely to get the good jobs, but then you can't get the publications or everything you need to get the good jobs. And so we call them virtuous and vicious cycles. And it's really sad when you can see somebody in this cycle and you can't help them out of it. As much as I can offer some support or guidance, it's really hard when you can see it playing out, because kind of that's what happened to my dad when he first arrived in the UK, kind of as an Indian doctor. And kind of it's a similar story I hear from lots of other people. And as much as there is this kind of glass ceiling that perhaps but in some ways still does exist, we are starting to see some cracks and we're starting to see some changes. And I guess my own personal narrative there would be that there was a push, I think in the part of the letter that students wrote about Cambridge Medical School having some institutional and structural problems, including racism, was they wanted more faculty to be of different backgrounds. And it just so happened after that I was appointed as the communication skills lead. And I'm not sure, you can draw from that what you will. I hope that I got the job because of my CV, my background and my attitude for the post. But there's always this little voice in your head that tells you maybe it wasn't. And so it's a real balancing act in your own mind about what you do with that, because some people may really resist and push back about accepting opportunities because they're unsure of where it comes from, just like you don't know where microaggressions come from. Is it from a woman or because I'm from a coloured background? Same with here. I'm not sure which of those many things I mentioned is why I got the job. But the difference is what you do when you are in power. What kind of role model am I setting or doing for my students? How accessible am I? How much do I stand by my values of actually respecting and recognising everybody's work around me and making sure my team feels supported and I develop them? You know, so it's really interesting how you can actually look at the same thing through completely different lenses.
Oh, that's really good. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that. And it's not a dissimilar experience to me. What I find is that in terms of diversity, people just count numbers. They don't count where those numbers are. And I think that's the next level of the debate, to look at diversity at all ranks. And also, it's sometimes not even about grades. It's also about some specialist areas. There's some courses where it's kind of like, or some particular fields in the workplace that is all white. And the question is why? And notice it. The first thing is to notice it, and then to ask why. Is it because others are not interested, or because they just can't get it some way?
I think representation is really important if you're a child and you're aspiring to a particular career. To see somebody who looks like you in that position makes a huge difference. I mean, I work as a veterinary surgeon. Veterinary medicine is one of the whitest professions in the Western world. And I think part of that is the sort of attraction of veterinary medicine to people who aren't white. Part of it is also accessibility to get sort of experience working with large farm animals, for instance. You know, we are, people of colour are historically found much more closer to city centres than we are to rural areas, so it can be harder to kind of get out and muck out people's pigs for a fortnight to get enough work experience to apply to veterinary. And also I think people are probably put off by the fact that they don't see somebody who looks a bit like themselves working in that profession and making a success of it. So it's very much a whiteout in veterinary, which is, I mean, there are organisations that are trying to sort of change that at grassroots level, going into schools, into primary schools, getting children interested in doing veterinary, because it is a very rewarding career. I mean, it's a very stressful one at times, but it is very rewarding. So, you know, we are trying to broach that problem, but it is a huge problem. And often people don't see it as a problem. But you know, we see a very varied clientele, and I think it's important for clients to also be able to see themselves represented in the veterinary industry too, to feel comfortable to bring their animals to us, to know that they're not going to be judged for any particular thing. You know, it's so I do see it as important, but not everybody does. It's a bit of a tricky one.
And I know I didn't grow up here, so I wasn't a child in this country, but you've just talked about grassroots initiatives. So if you can think back to where you were a child, what would have made a difference for you that you didn't have?
I think
what would have made things better? Yeah.
I don't know. I think having having teachers that believed that you could do it, for starters, might have helped. And also I had a great love of animals, and that never really got fostered at home because mum and dad weren't very keen on animals. So I think that was something that I had to kind of work past. Dad eventually, he did actually start supplying me with horses, which my mother thinks is the biggest mistake of his life ever. It's a very expensive one. But yeah, I think that's part of the you know, where we need to start. It's not just schools, it's also families as well, and getting people interested and getting, you know, talking to your children about how this is a potential career for you too, you know. So
do you have anything to share, Sanjita?
So I think Mira's really covered that effectively. So I would just kind of echo what she said and say it's about, first of all, having those conversations and people around you that start to believe in you. So there's trusted figures around you. So mom and dad are always going to think you're great, well, hopefully. And then and then on top of that, your teachers and people you respect and people in the community. And then it's thinking much wider about, actually, am I being represented on TV? So I think there's been some shows where actually they've got a diverse cast. And that's really important for young people to be seeing as well, that they can do anything. And it's not always an architect in the rom-com film, you know, that they can actually do other kind of lots of other things. And even I think there's a couple of dramas that have now come on. I probably shouldn't name drop dramas about TV shows, but some of them you will see high-ranking officials within this department were from minority backgrounds, were predominantly female, and that's really empowering to see that. And again, they weren't being judged as negative stereotype women, they were just women who are getting the job done, or women of color who are getting the job done, or people of color getting the job done. So actually the casting made no difference to the script that was written. So I think that's really powerful. So I'm seeing that more and more coming through. And also actors are speaking out. So to see some really, I think, yeah, John Boyega was quite a powerful one. There's a few other American actors who've really spoken up and been at the protests. And it's for young people who identify with these celebrities who are using their power for good and for social change, but social justice, because it's about the right thing to do, not necessarily just making a difference or making some money on social media.
I'm quite, I know this might sound a little bit difficult, but I think that sometimes we talk about racism is sort of a disadvantage to the people that are discriminated against. So if one party has a disadvantage to the other party, and do people talk about it? And how do you, in that kind of environment, how do you get buy-in from everyone? Do they have something to lose if racism goes away?
I think for me, it's about equity or equality, and equity and equality don't take away from the population that is currently benefiting. They just happen to benefit other populations or other minorities too. So it's not about, I think revenge would be taking away from a population and distributing to another. But I think the vast majority of people want to tackle racism from an equality and an equity point of view rather than anything else. There's no other agenda for most people. I mean, most people are fairly non-confrontational. Nobody wants to fight. Nobody really likes getting into a sort of fist fight, not even on social media. It can leave you feeling uncomfortable for days, and we've all been there, haven't we? Fought a battle, and it's left you internally feeling a bit wrecked. So I just think that I think maybe people perceive that they are going to lose out in some way, but actually, in fact, that's not generally the aim of anything, for anybody to lose out. Don't know if that answered your question or not.
It did, and I think it's trying to make it win-win for everyone and making everyone comfortable, because I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you've had to admit where you're wrong in something. It's quite difficult. So if we really want change, we have to be less judgmental, and we have to be more open to just meeting people where they are and trusting in good faith. That's what I think. I don't know. What do you think, Sanchita?
Totally agree, and that's why the biggest chunk of the training that we're doing with both faculty and our students is empathy training, to help them understand perspectives, because I think most of what I'd like to believe is these microaggressions or these things that are occurring, I'd like to believe they're unconscious bias leaking, because that helps me sleep at night. I've got some challenge on that in the past, but sometimes it's actually what I'd like to believe, and yes, I'm happy to receive challenge. The second thing is that some of the people who've been on the biggest journey about racism have been my white colleagues, and particularly one mentor who, or ally, who has really helped me in developing myself into this post and into this role. And when things weren't necessarily going, I can't be specific about that event, but there was an event that occurred, and actually the way that she supported me through that, and she goes, I need to work out how to be a good and effective white ally for you right now. And she has been on a bigger journey than I think anyone in my department on this racism thing. So that's the first thing. The second is I actually attended White Ally training. So I snuck in and then accidentally turned my camera on. So sorry about that. Because the point I'm trying to make is that to be able to write effectively and to change people's mind, I need to first understand what the perspective is and how we've ended up where we are, and actually to understand before we start changing people's minds. And the third thing is about loss aversion. So I've heard some powerful stories about the fact that people are losing out and they're worried about their children having less opportunities because of these changes, because they benefited from inequality and their children won't. And actually that's a real and valid viewpoint, because actually they weren't integral to structural inequalities, but they're receiving now the negative impact of equality being readdressed. And those are valid. And what we need to do is actually start that conversation, start talking about things, and kind of explore how we can work together more effectively, because actually that's the only way we can actually change people's minds.
Exactly. If you can't force, this is something that you can't force on anyone. And also it can be a place of pretense, just ticking the box because it will show in the end. So we really have to try and create ways to get buy-in, to get, like you said, like what you said about understanding their story and where they're coming from in order to be able to shape them.
But it's difficult, that's the challenge, that all of these different lived experiences equally are important. And so we call them sometimes first world problems or something else, but actually in that person's perspective, that's huge. So who are we to really negate that feeling? Because the feeling is real, right?
Yeah.
Even if the background of things is quite different to our own. But again, I'm happy to receive challenge on that one, because I tend to try and do anything that helps me sleep at night. So actually for me to believe that most racism and things are unconscious bias helps me to sleep at night. Same with believing, trying to understand other people's perspectives helps me to think, well, what can I make as a realistic change for this one interaction that just might ripple out?
I think if you always start from a position of good faith, yes, you may be disappointed, but and also with this, I think we're trying to reach the majority of people. So there may be a small number of people that may be intentional in their racism, but if the whole tide moves, then they will have no other option but to move. There will be no more cover for them. So whatever works for me, it's really
I'm just smiling because of the cat and the fact it was tailed doing this a bit.
Actually, they've both come in the room now, so they might suddenly both appear on Zoom. I do apologise.
It's okay, really. It's been a nice discussion and nice points. We've talked about treating each experience as an individual one, really about having those conversations and being open and people feeling confident to talk about their experiences, but also doing it in a positive way, which is like assume is conscious and that you have, because I think that the word is hope, because if you don't assume is unconscious, then you feel that you have little power to change it. So actually, if you believe that, then you think with more engagement, you have the power to change it. And I'd like to now hand over back to Jane for the questions.
You'll appear as if by magic. Thank you so much, all three of you. That was absolutely fascinating, and also incredibly, it was incredibly brave of you to talk about those things. So to be asked to do that, I realise is it's an imposition, and I'm grateful for you for agreeing to do it, all three of you. And I think and for offering up hope. I want to thank Sanchita for bringing that one up. First of all, because there has to be ways forward, doesn't there? And that's what's completely crucial. Last year we had a couple of speakers around this term. We had Foppy Aleli from the NUS. She talks about allyship. I'm rubbish at saying that. And Sophie Williams, who also wrote about being an anti-racism ally. And they were really, people did attend, but I feel like I need to keep up momentum. We have to keep people thinking about and talking about these things. That's what matters. These things, about racism. And I hope that people have listened hard and listened to what you had to say. I really do. I've got some questions, but I'm going to start by doing the easy thing and going with Alison's question here. And she's gone straight to the heart of what we're trying to think about. I mean, we are always trying to think about. At the moment, we have working our way towards how do we address equality, diversity and inclusion, but in this instance obviously specifically racism, in the college, you know, and I'm not looking at the students here, I'm looking about in the college, in the way we teach, in the way we are, in the fellowship, in the way we do our everything, fine, the way we are, and how do we do that? So that's coming swinging right into focus at the moment, and this was really crucial, I think, for reminding us that we need to. I liked Mira's thing. She said something about not making comparisons. And that's crucial. It's a crucial reminder, actually, that you can't go, well, it's a bit like, because no, it isn't a bit like. And actually, you drilled down even more narrowly into individual experience and not comparing. So every experience is different too. And that was clear tonight. So I really, really want to thank you for that. So there's a number of questions here. So Alison is asking, because she's on this equality, diversity and inclusion sort of working group that we're heading towards. What should college be doing on how to teach this? How do you teach people? And we've tried various ways of doing this, but how do you teach them to call out racism? Or even to recognize it, actually? What do you think the best ways are? Because believe me, we try.
So I can give you the answer from what we're doing in the clinical school, which has taken a lot of work. So first of all, it starts with encouraging conversations and allowing safe spaces to talk. They need to, the students, if they do report something, they need to know that we do something. So we're doing a lot of faculty training on how to have those conversations, how to have the conversation with our peers, also for my peers or faculty who are saying things that perhaps aren't as politically correct nowadays, and then making sure we close that feedback loop back to the students. They need to know that we're acting on what they're telling us. So I think that's the crucial thing, because if we don't signpost that we are doing something and they will be heard, the barriers to reporting just are going to outweigh any crucial evidence or information we need from our students. And the second is just to ask the students, what do they want from us? Because sometimes it will surprise us.
I think,
they're our audience. They're the people who we're trying to help today. They're the reason why we're all here.
And encouraging them to speak up, though, you know.
Yeah, so we've done loads of work on that. I'll be happy to share all of that with you, Jane, but the short answer is where we've got a communication skills session which is set up. It starts with recognizing and using some scaling tools. So you can tell I've done loads of work in this area. I've been immersed in this for the last 6 months. And then we've got a new session which is going live, which is where we use communication skills frameworks and video recording stuff in their suite, where we allow them to practice these microaggressions and how they might respond with 3 or 4 key strategic tools that we've developed.
Thank you.
So that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be able to do it, but they'll have the tools to be able to make the decision about when they act. And that's the key implementation for us.
And making the tools available.
Yeah.
Good.
So I'd be happy to share all of that with you.
I mean, Alison specifically in her question asked, should we be encouraging active bystander training, for instance?
Yeah, there's a little bit more to it than just being an active bystander, though, because you're an agent, then then a bystander, then an active bystander. So there's different levels of activity, and then there's that allyship. So it's that bystander allyship continuum that we really should be encouraging, because ideally, hopefully with a bit more awareness about these issues, people should be able to speak up in a non-confrontational way, in which case, well, how do we then support those inclusive changes higher up the chain?
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, no, I totally do. I mean, I think Mira said right at the start about herself feeling unable to speak up. And I think, you know, I will fess up to having been in those situations. I like to think that where I can, I would speak up. But there are moments when you freeze and you don't. And I think just to free everybody up to be able to say, that's outrageous, you know, and then come in a measured way, as you say, properly, and explain things to people. Yeah, that would be incredibly
good. Normal. So remember that these challenges cause the same stress response as a Bengal tiger standing next to you. So freeze, fight, flight. And you don't need to empathize or understand the tiger. You just need to get away, right? So it's completely natural to freeze. And actually one of the things that we're highlighting with students is please don't blame yourself for not speaking up. You can always report, you can always get support afterwards. You've got your tutors around you. We're here to talk, we're here to listen.
Thank you, Sanchita. There's a question from Ella. What advice would you give to somebody who is facing discrimination or racism? How do you talk to them first about that?
I think it's the person who's facing discrimination or racism has to have the confidence that they've got somebody to go to that's actually going to listen to them and take them seriously, because a lot of things are taken as claims, aren't they? I mean, if you're the only person there and the other person is the only person there, then who does anybody believe? And when we talk about racism being a very serious allegation, then what happens? Is it easier to ignore the person's complaint and just focus on we can't be sure that it was racism, so we're not going to treat it as racism type of thing, which unfortunately then empowers the person who made the comment in the first place and destroys the person who was on the receiving end. I'll give you an example. Actually, I was at a workplace a few years ago, and there was a girl there who was a little bit vocal in terms of the words that she used, and one of the words she used actually was the N-word. Now, my head of department actually said, "Oh, that's enough now." But it was left at that. And later on, she asked me in the tea room, "What do you want me to do about it?" Which then put the onus on to me to how to deal with racism in the workplace. And that shouldn't be on the shoulder of the person who has a sort of been party to that insult. It should be, there should already be things in place as to how to effectively deal in those situations. Anyway, nothing was done. That's
How do you want me to deal with it? I'm sorry, that one. Oh dear. Oh, Mira, I'm sorry you had that to deal with as well. Crumbs.
I'm good at it because I'm used to it.
I hope you came up with some sort of pithy response, but you know, I don't know, honestly. But is that appropriate? No, you should be angry. Right, are there specific things, so from Leslie, are there specific positive things that the college can do to support inclusion? In this case, you know, this specific inclusion. How do we make everybody feel included, I guess, is what Leslie's asking.
I think
is that the way, is that what we're after?
Well, I think where it starts is at your staff level, I suppose. I mean, you have to look at who you've employed in the college, and are they representative of the population as a whole? And if they're not, then you have to address why that is. And I think that's quite a difficult one to look at, but that's where it starts.
You're staring at the old white women at the top here. No, but you're absolutely right. And we are mindful. Sorry.
Sexism is a big issue too. So I think that it's not just about equality within, I know we're talking about racism today, but actually the cognitive load of being both a female and the more of these, there's an intersectionality between all of these characteristics, that the more we call them protected or other characteristics we have, the greater that impact is. And so actually having a female senior tutor is really nice for me at least, to see actually that you can, you know what I'm getting at.
Well, I cheated, Sanchita, though, because when I was a fellow, we were all female. So there are male fellows present, I think. So that's, in actual fact, we've swung the other way to try and be inclusive and include some men now in our fellowship. But yeah, amongst the senior tutors, as a group across the university, it's nice, and with the heads of houses, to see that there is a balance there, finally, a balance there. Yeah. Yes, these things matter too. There's a lot of mistrust this is a good question from Purna. There's a lot of mistrust as to the effectiveness of the unconscious bias training that universities generally implement. Is there anything you could recommend to strengthen its reliability?
So we know it's not the best test, but it's the best we have, I think, is the way to signpost that hard. I'm assuming it's the hard implicit bias test.
Yeah.
The only way is that we actually need to have those conversations afterwards and actually explore what we've noticed and what we're going to do about it. I think that's it. We have to have those conversations.
So talk to people about how they fare in the tests, and
Or allow just even like a professionalism kind of supervision where they actually have a group and talk about things, and the fact they find some things difficult and they should be noticing things that in the implicit bias test come up they weren't expecting, because that's what happens to all of us. And once we normalize the fact we're all biased because we're human beings, right, then it becomes easier to have that conversation about, okay, this is now how it might be expressed, and then you have that safety culture where they can call things out in a way that's okay and safe. And then if we're supporting our colleagues to call things out, it means that we were intrinsically supporting our students to speak openly too.
Yeah, absolutely. Purna, does that answer your question?
Sorry, yeah, I'm here. Yes, of course. I mean, I was coming from the point of view of also, you know, some providers try particularly hard, and they do say, we have changed this and that, and you do feel obliged at certain levels to say, okay, maybe if this doesn't work, someone else who has tried something else, maybe that works. So it's not a provider issue. I agree with you. I think it's really what we internalize based on the training that we need to take back and unpack between ourselves. I think that's where, I think that definitely answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you. And then from Nicole, so related to that question, yeah, do you have any thoughts to share on dealing with tokenism? I think someone touched on this actually when you were speaking, but do you? Yeah.
I'm not sure, do I need to answer it anymore? It's about what you do with it. So yes, tokenism is a pitfall, but I hope that if you look at my department, I am kind of the only, I think I am the only coloured person who's got a title there, and it's actually what you do with it. So as much as things may have originated in that reason, and I might be ticking a box, I've got much more to me than that, and actually my work speaks for itself. And I hope that I've come across as somebody who is educated and okay to talk to you today, and that I have some value in talking to you, and that's the way we change people's minds.
Definitely didn't employ you as a, you know.
No, sorry. Sorry, not. No, this is another.
No, I just wanted you to feel reassured. You know, absolutely, yeah. It is a question, though. I mean, it's something that crops up all the time. I've been the only woman on an interview panel, you know, for large posts, because I'm pretty certain they needed a woman there. Yeah. Oh gosh. Ella's about to chop us off. She did warn us she does this. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much. I mean, I'd love to catch up with all of you again at some point. Must do that mirror. We need to be in contact. Thank you. If we could do a round of applause, we would, but otherwise it's a, you know, bigger, oh, there's some hands. Oh, I mean, thank you so much for coming and actually keeping this dialogue going so that college, you know, addresses things and takes it forward. And I'll keep Sanchita's one of us, but I'll keep Myoma and Mira up to speed with what we are doing as well.
That'd be great.
Good to see you both. She hasn't chopped us off, she's left us. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you to the audience for taking part too. Thank you for the questions very much.